Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on weird and true mysterious stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Did you know you can support the channel by joining? Something to think about. Now onto the stories. Case file number 931, written by No One Here 21. Not even the Lockpicking Lawyer could pick this glitch. Last week I was sitting at my desk working on a project for a job as a graphic designer. I had been sitting there for hours and was starting to feel a bit restless. I decided to take a quick break and stretch my legs, get some fresh air. I got up from my desk, walked to the door and stepped out into the hallway, then closed the door behind me. As I walked down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sort of a pervasive aura, an atmosphere of anxiety. I turned around and walked back to my office door. I reached out to grab the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I tried again, but it was like the door was locked. I was confused because I knew I had closed it behind me without locking it. I pulled out my keys and tried to unlock it, but the key wouldn't fit into the lock. I tried the door handle again, but it still wouldn't open. It was like something didn't want me to get back into my office. Just then, one of my colleagues walked by and saw me standing there. I explained the situation to her, trying not to sound nuts, and she tried the door, but it wouldn't open for her either. Naturally, she asked me if I had somehow locked the door behind me. These aren't the type that automatically lock when closed. Only the door that opens to the whole office floor does that. We called the building's maintenance worker to check on the issue. He looked at the door and said, "What's the problem, ma'am?" We both tell him that my office door is locked, even though I don't remember having locked it on my way out. I always test the handle to make sure it isn't locked before actually closing it. He attempts to unlock it with the key he has designated for it, but it doesn't open either. The key fit inside, but it wouldn't turn. So he tried the master key, and that one worked. The entire handle had to be removed and switched the following day. It's altogether bizarre. When I got back inside my office, nothing was altered or taken as far as I could tell. Did some force try to keep me out by destroying the internal mechanism of the lock? Whatever it was, it made me feel sick. Case notes are file 931. Not even the lockpicking lawyer could pick this glitch. So the fact that nothing was taken from your office, there were no ramifications from not being able to enter, like you didn't miss a deadline or anything like that, seems like it's more random than intentional will. There's simply no clear motive to not want you to go into the office. Although, as far as you've stated anyways. It's also not some state of quantum immortality where you're just in a new universe where the key doesn't work, because also the maintenance man copy of the key didn't work. So there was actually a real change in the locking mechanism. Something caused the pins in the lock itself to malfunction. I do watch a lot of Lockpicking Lawyer just for entertainment value. His presentation is hilarious. Kinda makes me feel a bit unsafe about locks because they're so easy to defeat. Well, most of them anyways. I'm not an expert in how locks work, so I don't know exactly what would have to de-render to affect a lock like that or just be altered at all. Because yeah, the maintenance man's key did work. And I also don't know about master keys. How do those work exactly? But regardless, it does seem like, in my opinion, that something was altered in the lock itself. And this isn't some universal transfer or anything like that. What could affect it? I mean, it's conceivable that something in the locking mechanism de-rendered and maybe re-rendered incorrectly, or just didn't re-render at all. If you can insert the key, it seems like the shape is correct, but it's not pushing the pins high enough, I think. Something happened with the lock. Was it the random universe glitching, or some sort of entity that managed to alter the lock, damage it? I'm leaning more towards the former just because it seems more random to me than intentional. Case file number 932. Written by lowIQalert, Quantum Love. My dad and I stopped at a drive-thru on the way home. Moments after, I began to experience increasing levels of wildly unfounded anxiety, to the point that it leaves me dizzy and nauseous. They handed us the wrong order, so we will have to wait a short while. I'm sitting there feeling terrible when I suddenly get the urge to call my sister. She had gotten into an automobile accident and was trying to phone us. She was just shaken, whereas some people suffered major injuries. I instructed her to stop talking and move away from the car as much as she could. She didn't understand, but she persisted in attempting to reach some of her friends. There was a huge boom, followed by shouting. She told me what had happened after the whole thing was over. She slammed the gas, drifted, and smacked the bottom of the car on some rocks while trying to impress several girls in the car. She, leans that way, which is completely fine. This completely wrecked the engine. Only my sister had minor bruises as a result of the incident. She said that she was in front of the car, just inches from the hood, when I instructed her to move out of the way. This was the first time I'd ever had an experience like it, both before and after. It's just a really strange memory. I can't even recall what I was thinking. I seem to remember it as if I were watching a movie and seeing everything in myself from a different perspective. Case file number 932, Quantum Love. So if you don't know, in quantum mechanics you can entangle particles, which simply means that if you measure the spin of one particle, the other spin of the other particle, it'll be determined, the waveform will collapse for that one too. Now you can't transmit information via this, but it does happen at great distances. Einstein himself called this spooky action at a distance, because while you can't transfer information, it's still an effect that's happening regardless of distance. So even if it's greater than a light second, it'll happen instantaneously across the universe if needed. It is rather spooky. And given that, that's something that's entirely real, very well known by physics, by scientists, and yet we don't know how. Maybe wormholes connect these particles somehow, very tiny? But one thing is clear, there is a method to connect atoms together. Could it be translated to a higher macro level state, where it's a human mind or the human soul? I think it's possible. And certainly there are stories that lead you to think that, like in this one, where you feel that anxiety, or like a mother knows that their son is injured or something like that. There's this connection that we do have, especially with people that we think about a lot. I think that thought is necessary. It reinforces the connection. Now that said, I think it's not just the connection. The connection isn't enough. You may receive the information, but your brain couldn't necessarily process it. So you have to be open to the idea to even be able to accept it. And then maybe you can process it. Even if it happens subconsciously, you'll feel it. Case file number 933, written by grapesandfear. The prison that glitched my life. I was a prison officer working at a detention facility in a tiny town in Ohio. I arrived at work at 9 p.m. I worked the night shift. When I showed up for work that evening, my boss appeared perplexed and questioned my presence. "I work tonight," I remarked. "But they said that you called in a few hours ago to report being sick," he said. "It must have been someone else," feeling a little puzzled. It was a little strange when everyone else arrived for work that evening. But we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their positions for the evening. I reported to work in the control room, my standard post. The control room is located in the middle of the prison and has direct control over everything, including the cameras, doors, and phones. I looked at the message that claimed I called in, after removing the on-duty guard and settling in for the evening. The system noted I had called at 6:50 and explained that I had become ill while out storm cleaning. The previous night, there had been a storm that was quite bad, but not so awful that I had to go outside and clean it up. It was genuinely odd. Around that time, the supervisor took over. We got to chatting about it and how strange it was because he was also a friend of mine outside of work. While he was still seated there, I made the decision to phone my wife at home, telling her about this. I made a call after picking up the phone. A man answered the phone after 2 rings and responded, "Hello?" For a little moment, I was at a loss for words. I double-checked that I had dialed the correct number by looking at the phone, and I had. The person repeated, "Hello?" after a little interval, in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello? Who is this?" The individual asked, "This is Taylor. Who is this?" Taylor is also my name, which caused my head to spin. I nearly screamed, "Where is Anne?" My thoughts were racing the entire time as I dashed to my car and drove quicker than I was legally permitted to my house. My wife was sitting in front of the TV when I burst through the door. She was surprised to see me there. She responded that nobody had been here when I questioned who was there, and went to call the prison to let them know what was happening after having a very lengthy conversation with my wife, but the phone was dead. When I returned to work, Dave was acting strangely, and he questioned me. "How the heck are you doing this?" He claimed that when he picked up the phone after I left, the caller sounded just like me. He was kind of scared, and disconnected the call. He saw my car leave the parking lot a minute later. From my house, I had called back and questioned what the heck was going on. He hung up and told me to quit prank calling. And then I was feeling a little irritated and sick. We returned to work when I persuaded him that I genuinely had no idea what was going on. I later discovered that the storm the previous night had damaged the phone line in my neighborhood. So who had I been talking to? The oddest thing that has ever happened to me, without a doubt. Case notes are file 933, the prison that glitched my life. This is kind of like a whole jumbled mess of universal chords, multiversal chords. You were talking to yourself in another universe, the lines were crossed with the phones, one universe where the phone lines weren't damaged. You were somehow talking through that phone line's connection to another person in a different universe. The whole thing just seems like a wild chaos event. And yeah, I would have been kind of creeped out too. One thing I'm wondering is, related to the storm itself, if you have a whole bunch of storms in all universes or many universes, would that link them together? If there is something that's able to permeate through the membrane that separates these universes, well, it probably would require a lot of energy. And what does a storm have? It has a ton of energy, and kinetic energy from the rainfall and the wind, and of course electrical energy from lightning. There's a ton of energy in a storm. So if you have a whole bunch of storms happening in a whole bunch of universes, well, maybe that's enough energy to weaken the membrane, and then you can get issues like this. I wonder if there's more accounts of universal peering or transference in storms, especially in like hurricanes or tornadoes. I'll have to look into that. It's a hypothesis, who knows. La vidéo c'est complet encore, c'est bon, mais j'en fais tellement, c'est bon. Si t'as aimé la vidéo, poussez sur le bouton like, puis c'est ça. Je te vois la semaine prochaine. Ben, je te vois demain si t'écoutes les shorts. C'est bon aussi, je pense. Tu devrais l'écouter.